The debt is wrapped in large part around our defense budget. I mean, we have taken a position post war that we're defending the world. And Trump is changing that. He's saying, no, you got to pay for your own defense. And he's been successful in 3 weeks, 4 weeks. He's got Germany to step up now. He's got England to step up now. So this is, if he doesn't reduce U.S. defense expenditures, at the very least, he's going to reshuffle them and modernize them and spend the money in other places. But he's looking, I think, as I step inside his head, he's looking at rearranging defense postures. And we're going to see another Yalta conference, essentially. I mean, I don't think you can really look at this period and not reflect back to World War II and then the Reagan years. I don't think you can divorce that from any kind of market analysis. We're in a structural change period, and it revolves around how he looks at defense. Clearly, he's talking about. I've never seen a president talk about Panama in the south and Greenland in the north, and then picking a fight with Canada and saying that Canada has to boost its defense budget while he did the same thing to Europe. I've never seen this. So we're trying to figure out the impact to the dollar and gold. And I don't think you could look at it and avoid the way we used to look at things. We used to look at the Fed and say, well, the Fed's important. That's a misfocus as far as I'm.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Markets and Madness. As we say, the place where we discuss the madness that occurs when politics, economics, and personalities all move in different directions. Today we have Alex Chaia with us, managing partner of Catalyst Futures. Alex is based in the UK, does a lot of dealings throughout Latin America, just came back from a trip, I understand, from Brazil and Argentina, has got a lot to say there. Tim is with us, so good morning everyone. How's everybody doing?
Good morning,
Morning,
guys.
Fred.
Nice to speak to you
All
again.
good. So, Alex, welcome back. I know we've had you on a few times and you had some very interesting things to say. What I'm
Yes.
curious about is how the Brits, the Europeans, feel about Trump 2.0, Doge, tariffs, Ukraine, and and all of the above.
Interesting. Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot happening. Everybody's is very concerned on this side, and there isn't much different opinions. They're much against what is happening there. And
All negative to
very
what's going on in the
negative.
U.S.
Like there is a group that is going around London and fixing like some adverts, like calling Elon Musk a Nazi and calling Trump a dictator, and this rhetoric seems to be following on the news as well, and general opinion. But however, if you look at the government steps, they are starting to cut costs on the administration. So just yesterday, there was a change in the National Health Service announced that 10,000 people were going to lose their jobs. It was mostly bureaucratic jobs, but they started to be concerned, rightfully so, on competition and how they should catch up with everything that is happening all over the world.
So is that something similar to what Musk is doing with Doge here?
Exactly, exactly. I think they don't want to be behind, and rightfully so. Similar changes are, despite a different, perhaps political view, they're in the end like trying to decrease costs so they're able to afford military expenses as well.
Yeah, and I noticed that Germany was talking about increasing their military budgets, but Starmer was talking about boots in the ground and planes in the air in Ukraine. That's got to increase their defense budget. So I don't know. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Depends on which perspective you have. But
Yeah, it depends on your timing point of view as well. I mean, when you try to turn the world upside down, that whole period, you get a little dizzy. What Trump's trying to do, I think, is something I don't think we've seen in our lifetimes, you know. Maybe if you go back before you guys were born to the age of Eisenhower and before Eisenhower and Kennedy, he's completely turning the world upside down. He's putting a circle around North America from a defense standpoint. I mean, when was the last time we had a guy talking about Greenland and Panama on both ends of the continent? You know, he's looking at North America and saying to Canada, "Okay, we need a North American defense treaty, essentially," and he's tying that all up with trade issues, the likes of which we have never seen. So yeah, it's uncomfortable for sure.
Yeah, what they say is when you say no to people, it forces them to change, and nobody likes to change. So the Europeans are in the middle of that right now.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, after World War II, and I mean, I'm a baby boomer. I was born in 1948. So when I was a kid, we were still talking about World War II. I was only 10 years old. And since World War II, I mean, try to think about where the U.S. was in World War II. Europe was in tatters. Asia was in tatters. So we said, all right, we're going to rebuild Asia, and we're going to rebuild Europe. We set up trade policies that were distorted so that we would build them up. We used the U.S. consumer, which was the only consumer in the world that was still in shape. England was still on bicycles, essentially. And I can remember that, looking at newsreels as a kid, watching everybody riding bikes in the UK. I mean, it's unthinkable now, but that's what I saw as an American child. So all of our policies were geared towards rebuilding Europe. Germany, we gave Germany first generation steel mills. We gave Japan first generation steel mills. We rebuilt Europe. The posture, really now, you can't think in those terms. It's ancient history. But that's what was set up. And Trump is saying, okay, it's time to turn that around now. We've done it. We've built up Europe. We've built up Asia. And our trade policies have reflected that. We've run these enormous deficits for years. Now we're in debt to the tune of, $36 trillion. We can't continue to do that. So we've done what we needed to do. And the world's not looking at it that way. The world's saying, well, we want to keep this going. We want to continue access to your consumers and blocking access to our consumers. That's Trump's perspective.
Yeah, and there is one point though that this world financing and deficit, because the deficit is not just in the U.S. but in Europe runs a deficit as well, and Latin America, most governments are running a deficit at the moment. Germany has been very strict about its budget, but will now start running a deficit. But behind all this World War II movement since today, there is the implicit understanding that this financing is backed by the dollar, right? So it moved against everybody leaving gold as a standard and leaving other assets as a standard and relying on the emission of the US dollar to finance all this. So my main concern, of course, as a trader, and as a portfolio manager, is about how this will affect asset prices. In the end, the real currency is gold. Behind, if you see how gold prices evolve, it just reached $3,000 per ounce. Whereas both euro and the US dollar, it was swinging quite a lot these days, from 1.03 to 1.12 nearly, and now 1.08 or 9. But they are still following the same path, whilst gold, silver continue going up. So how do you guys read this?
I think gold's decoupled from everything. Gold was the inflation safe haven, yet inflation seems to be, the back has been broken, at least in the U.S. That's the talk. Gold has been the war safe haven, and I know we haven't gone completely to peace in the Ukraine. We're not there yet. But everything you look at, gold is, yeah, the currency of choice. And could it be 5,000? Why not? Could it be 10,000? You know,
Yeah, and that's an interesting point that gold is decoupled, but I guess I'm stuck in a mindset here, and I'm trying to put myself in inside of Trump's head. And I got to tell you, it's not a pretty sight. Lonnie, it keeps flashing up at me, and it's a whole other issue. But that notwithstanding, you just made a point, Alex, about the debt and the dollar. And the debt is wrapped in large part around our defense budget. I mean, we have taken a position post war that we're defending the world. And Trump is changing that. He's saying, no, you got to pay for your own defense. And he's been successful in 3 weeks, 4 weeks. He's got Germany to step up now. He's got England to step up now. So this is, if he doesn't reduce U.S. defense expenditures, at the very least, he's going to reshuffle them and modernize them and spend the money in other places. But he's looking, I think, as I step inside his head, he's looking at rearranging defense postures. And we're going to see another Yalta conference, essentially. I mean, I don't think you can really look at this period and not reflect back to World War II and then the Reagan years. I don't think you can divorce that from any kind of market analysis. We're in a structural change period, and it revolves around how he looks at defense. Clearly, he's talking about. I've never seen a president talk about Panama in the south and Greenland in the north, and then picking a fight with Canada and saying that Canada has to boost its defense budget while he did the same thing to Europe. I've never seen this. So we're trying to figure out the impact to the dollar and gold, and I don't think you could look at it and avoid the way we used to look at things. We used to look at the Fed and say, well, the Fed's important. That's a misfocus as far as I'm concerned. I really think it's a bigger play field now.
Yeah, absolutely.
it's certainly government induced. The economy is run through the government now, not through the Fed anymore, or at least for the next couple of years. I think we're dealing with all of these, with the tariffs, with the cost cutting, with the layoffs. That's the driving force behind everything that's going on in the trading markets, as I see it. In terms of the equity markets, we've seen a big sell-off so far. People are talking about recession. I think we've been in a recession, but we just haven't noticed it. It's been masked. Saw a lot of things earlier this week that we've had capitulation, that the great up buying opportunities. We had Steve Flanagan on earlier in the week saying Warren Buffett's going to start putting some of his cash reserves to work. These are great buying opportunities, and I think ultimately they will. But I don't think it's over yet. I think we have a lot more downside in the Dow and the S&P, and people are trying to buy it. We've said this a number of times. Every time we have these big sell-offs, that it always comes back. It always comes back. I don't know if we're going to come back right away this time. Yeah, I agree that there's going to be buying opportunities, but I think 3 months from now there's going to be buying opportunities, not 2 weeks from now.
On
The
the
dollar
second
too, I
point,
think.
I don't know how they're going to finance all this increased cost. So I'm expecting more money printing.
And we're in Europe, you mean, in the UK?
Well, the tax rates are so high already, like it's averaging 45, 50% in most European countries. I don't see how they can finance with more taxes or even reshuffling costs that is limited, and I think there'll be more money printing.
Do you think it's going to be switching money from some of the social infrastructure to defense, or you just
Oh,
think
that's happening already. So
that's
the
happening?
UK reduced international aid to allocate to military. Now they are cutting some what they call the quangos, which like arm's length departments of the government. They are mostly administrative, so they started cutting all these costs. So just on the NHS is more than 10,000 employees in one go.
So you're seeing them print as opposed to borrow. That's interesting because if that's so, then you're talking about a reduction in non-dollar money supply and a reduction of dollar money supply as well. That's a dramatic contraction. That
Yeah,
puts the world in a trough for a long time.
and Trump wants the dollar to be cheaper, right? He mentioned this many times. So I think they will follow this tantrum and make the euro or the pound cheaper as well. You see.
You
Yeah,
know,
all right.
I
Race to the
always,
bottom again.
I always felt that the G7 that we grew up with when I was trading 80s and 90s were just a function of the seven major finance ministers sitting around and saying, all right, you're going to take the bullet. We're all going to devalue against you quietly amongst this table. And then they would rotate who took the pain for the next year. And I think they were like forced mini devaluations. That's what I think the G7 was for
Yeah,
all of
and the
those times.
reality is
We look
that this
back.
is happening already as we speak, right? This is why gold is record highs. You know, it's I think that this is happening as we speak.
You think it's happening in the U.S. where we're increasing the money supply? Uh, it looks to me like the Fed is trying to do that. The Fed is quietly still inflating by growing their balance sheet, not with the open market operations, but Trump
It
is just
looks
the
like
opposite.
by watching gold. That's what I'm saying.
Uh-huh. Yeah, but there's probably some hoarding going on among the central banks. I mean, China has got a bit underneath, and there's no doubt that China's a buyer of gold. What its purpose is, I don't know. A year ago, I might have said it was bricks. You know, it was
Yeah, no, Brazil
preparation
as
for
well.
I
bricks.
Brazil is
think if
buying a
you're at a
lot of
central
gold.
bank
I
now
know this.
and you have some of your reserves in dollars, you can't trust what Trump's going to do. So if you're a central bank fearful of what the next step is, you know what? I don't know if he's going to freeze our assets, what he's going to do. I'm going to buy gold.
A very
And
good point.
and central banks are going to move to gold and just be a little cautious about where we are.
Yeah, that could be driving it.
Yeah, I think it's just fear. We saw it. We saw initially when we put sanctions on the Russians for going into Ukraine. Gold got a pop because there were people that were afraid of it. It was like the old Swiss franc trade, right? When things broke out, let's move it into Swiss francs. But then they opened up to the tax authorities globally, and now the Swiss franc is not the safe haven that it was. Gold is still going to be the safe haven. And if you trust,
Equindata.
and if you trust Bitcoin, Bitcoin's going to be that as well.
We used to say when somebody points a gun at somebody else, buy Swiss francs. That was the rule back then in the early 70s.
That is a good rule, I have to say.
You just came back from Latin America. You spent 3 weeks, a month down there.
I did.
What did you take away from your trip? You were in Brazil and in Argentina, right?
Yeah, I'm mostly excited about what's happening in Argentina. I think what's happening in Argentina is the biggest economic experiment of for a long time, of our times, I would say, but probably longer than that, you know. So Argentina has struggled with inflation, well, basically since the 30s, you know, like since the 30s and 40s, with a sequence of populist governments like the Peronism and a lot of this financing through, you know, issuing more currency and devaluing the Argentinian peso and running big budget deficits. So this has been a struggle of Argentina. If you see the inflation rates year by year since the 40s, it has been a problem. Stopped somehow in 1991 and 1990 when they pegged against the US dollar, and poverty levels increased quite fast because you have this initial shock and adjustment, you know. So the government couldn't stand at that time, and so Peronism came back and with the same inflationary formula. Now, I met some good economists there and asset managers, and they are all very optimistic because they are seeing the government making changes, reducing spending very quickly, and now we are seeing superávit in Argentina that they didn't see for a long time. And there are elections in October which are very crucial to determine whether the government is going to be able to continue its program and implement the changes that they want or not.
So this is similar to the midterm elections that Trump is going to face in 2 years.
Exactly. What they are excited about because that they believe that the people of Argentina finally understand that the government cannot just keep spending and creating inflation to finance itself. Even though the poverty levels are super high, it's like nearly 40%, and whoever is not working in Argentina has a big problem. The cost of living there is enormous. I was really surprised about that. Just personal parody. 8 years ago there, I had steak dinner and bottled wine for two for $20. Now it's 120, you know. So it catched up with global price levels very quickly with those changes. And President Milei wants to stop this money printing. He is an advocate of shutting down the central bank because he thinks that people should decide what currency they are going to use, and that the government should not be able to finance itself through inflation. You know, so very interesting times there. I saw a lot of optimism despite the shock that they are facing in terms of the economy, and I see great potential there. I have to say.
Let me ask you, let me make a point and ask you a question. I view Argentina as a prototype to the U.S. I think the whole Argentine experiment, the whole Milei emergence on the scene, and the austerity program, and the recognition that you can't keep printing into affluence. I think that preceded the U.S. by about a year. It looks to me, and I really want to ask you whether or not you think this is accurate. It's very possible that Argentina could be the Latin American recipient of Latin American hot flows. You could see money coming out of Venezuela and different places and into Argentina as a safe haven in Latin America. In other words, they don't need the dollar safe haven, but a Latin American safe haven.
Absolutely, it should, especially if they manage to. Let's watch the October elections. This is the key moment there. But what's happening? You have they have the two currency exchange rates for quite a while now. The dollar blue and the official rate. Well, the official rate is something for exporters, importers, big banks that you need to apply for. You know, it's not. It's getting easier to access it, but it's never been very easy. And 1 year ago, the difference between the blue rate, which is the black market rate basically, but what that is the real one because it's a difference between US bonds and Argentinian bonds. It's a calculated rate. 1 year ago, that was 200% different to the official. Now it's just 10. It's almost at a friction level. As soon as these both are caught up together, and if the government wins in October, the majority, then afterwards, what the idea is to float the currency completely, you know, and that will make things very much easier. Also, they have three exchanges in Argentina, one for equities, one for futures, one for bonds, and they merged together now. And I learned some things that I didn't know, that you can actually post collateral in U.S. Treasuries. That's already a mega liberal thing to do, you know. So you can go there, invest in Argentina, and post your collateral with American securities, you know. So I think this is a big thing.
Make it very flexible, yeah.
Yeah, they are becoming very flexible, and there's so much to catch up, right? So they are far behind. Worse than Argentina in South America in terms of economy, it's Venezuela. That's what was happening before. So the upside is really, really big. It's a super educated nation. It's like 80% has a higher degree compared to 20% in Brazil. Natural resources very abundant, and minerals and agriculture, you know. So
I'm going to ask you to look at this from a different perspective. Technology changed, but back in the 80s, which is 40 years ago, the world divided itself into three sections. There was America, there was Europe, and there was Asia. And each section had its own central bank. It was the Bundesbank in Europe. It was the Fed in North America. And it was the Bank of Japan in Asia. And each section had its own consumer, major consumer. In the US, it was US and Canada. In Europe, it was the European consumer. And it was mostly Japan and Asia. And each sector had its own low-cost consumer, low-cost producer, I'm sorry. You had Eastern Europe and Europe making the cheap goods. You had Latin America and North America, or at least in that part of the world, as a cheap consumer, a producer. Asia, you had the tigers. And it looks to me like we're moving back to a period like that, where you got China with its own sphere, and you got Europe with its own sphere, and you have America with its own sphere, and now Latin America is carving its own sphere out as well, which has to be dealt with Argentina as the central point, pivot point. Is that a fair assessment of what's happening?
I think so, yeah.
So if that's the case, then your moves in Argentina are pretty big. I understand you're going to be a market maker there?
Yeah, I'm definitely trying to get more involved, and it's difficult to find still investor appetite for it, because everybody's still scared about the defaults that happened some time ago, but I'm getting people involved, getting people to talk about it, and
Do you have a business plan?
yeah, and opening accounts and things. So I'm getting involved, that's for sure, and yeah, and because I think they all tell me the trigger is the October elections, and I will follow the locals on that, because that seems to be a really key event. There is some protest in Buenos Aires this week, like people putting fire in cars and stuff like this, because, of course, if prices adjusted to global levels, not the artificial levels that were before, and you have a big unemployed population, it hits really hard, But it looks like they're going to get this through.
Just bringing up further to both of your points, it seems like we're going to see more of a push together between Argentina and the U.S., between Milei and Trump, really, and then bring that. Do you see like free trade agreements there, or is there any talk about that?
That's what they like. That's what Milei believes in. He's a true liberal. He is a member of the Austrian economics school, and he believes in complete free trade. He thinks people should choose their own currency. I found this fascinating. So
choose their own currency. Explain.
Yeah, he says like the government should not have the monopoly on central banking and currency controlling. You see, so if people want to use the dollar to transact, they should use the dollar. If they want to use peso. Use gold. Use gold. That's about to the market to decide. So it's free trade at its like utmost level. Wow. So I really hope he goes through, because that will be an enormous experiment for humanity, really. Like if they succeed with this complete freedom, then I think this can be.
It's like Argentine Milton Friedman.
Yeah, beyond.
And it's the opposite of Europe. Europe converged everything to one. He's saying take it all out the other way, right?
Yeah. I just read Millei's book about how to destroy inflation. He has a short book. He wrote about it, and he really hate Keynes and there's really, really strong arguments against it. And he says inflation, he believes inflation is just about debasing the currency and a government-made structure. And a very strong argument, actually, because he says like economists around the world giving their opinion say, oh, inflation is going up because electricity prices went up, because, like fuel prices went up. He says this is nonsense. Because if some prices went up, obviously people who have income will be not able to afford something else. So as a rule, if the government is not printing money, there can be no general inflation. So it's an interesting
This is
point.
Friedman. This is Friedman. This is true supply side. And I think there, Milei and Trump are simpatico. I mean, I think they clearly see eye to eye. Friedman had said that inflation is a function of money supply growing at the same rate as output. And if output doesn't grow as fast as money supply, you have inflation. Money supply outpaces output. So if you want to shrink inflation, you have two choices: either reduce the money supply or increase the goods. And if you increase the goods, the output, then you're a supply sider. And it sounds like Milei is that, exactly that, and Trump is too.
Let's see.
What about Brazil? You were talking about the protests in Brazil. Any benefit there, or is that still a work in progress?
Well, the government is a big spender at the moment. So the government is a big spender. Inflation was slightly above expectations. Interest rates are going to reach 14% before the end of the year. It's nearly there. Interest rate in Brazil is 252 basis and not 360, but this is something we can talk another time. It's just like 14% in Brazil is actually 12, but still
Okay.
high. Anyways, but yeah, so government big spender, inflation a bit above expectation, but the GDP is growing. So the positive numbers on GDP, on employment, and one of the reasons is agriculture. The Brazilian agriculture has been a big hero for the country for the past years, but they are record producing soybeans, corn, coffee, and prices are up. So the government is already talking about taxing a little bit more these guys because they are globally competitive. Like I saw specialist agriculture analysts in the U.S. In the Midwest saying like that the American producer needs to catch up with the Brazilian because the technology, the genetics that they are using, everything is really cutting edge, and you are seeing this in the results of the exports. Not to mention diversification, right? China importing more soybeans from Brazil, maybe even Europe now with all the tariffs going on. So agriculture is a big winner. GDP is going well, but inflation, interest rates, and spending it's a problem to be seen if this government will continue. It looks like it could move in this Argentinian Trump direction next year election. The polls are 50-50, I would say.
Who's the conservative?
Well, there is a Bolsonaro, famous Bolsonaro, but there are a lot of legal issues. He might not be able to be a candidate. Whether this is fair or not, I'm not going to get into this discussion. But the governor of the state of São Paulo is a guy who's doing many changes in the state and is really pro-business, Tarcísio, and it looks like he's going ahead as a candidate. He would be a very strong candidate, so let's see.
Interesting.
So at least short term, I guess, Trump is shuffling up the world, and we're going to be shopping based on these tariff discussions for a new low-cost producer. I think his goal is to reduce the abilities of China to be. China's really our low-cost producer right now, and it'd be nice if Argentina could pick up some of that slack. Whether or not Argentina has the capacity to do so is the question. To what extent can Argentina, or Latin America in general, but I guess Argentina leading it, become a low-cost producer to rival that of Asia? Do you see that as a remote possibility?
Well, it's a lot to catch up there, I have to say, but it's education levels are super high. There are a lot of engineers. There are a lot of they can catch up quickly. I think it's a big candidate for this.
That would really be, I mean, Argentina, Latin America has lagged in terms of global producers. It really hasn't stepped up. Mexico to some degree, I suppose, as a result of the trade agreements. But, you know, with a sound economic and financial policy in Argentina, the next stop would be to create their industrial base or recreate the industrial base and get them to supply the U.S. consumer.
Exactly. The recreate is the one because it's really been all about agriculture for a long time now. So there's a lot to catch up.
That would be a great play, a great 21st century play. That would literally reshape the world.
Yeah, I remember when Trump 1.0 was running, and there was some pundits that were writing that Trump is such an egomaniac that he wants to have his picture on Mount Rushmore, right? But his first term, he was worried about the second term, about running. Now he's not worried about anything, and his ego is going to make him be a force to be reckoned with. He's going to do what needs to be done. In this case, it's front loading the pain, but I think he's looking for a dramatic change. You know, the way Obama said he's going to change the country, I think Trump is changing the country, but
Change the world.
yeah, going back 80 years, as you say, at least 80 years, he's changing the world. And I think with that ego, he's going to be remembered in the history books as very big force. If he's wrong and it turns out as a fail, he'll be in the history books. But if he's right and it changes the focus and the complexion of how all this global trade and global economies are, it would be a feather in his hat. Absolutely.
Either way, our historical moves. I think us as traders, what we need to do is just keep watching what's happening with all the indicators and I would say like I started measuring everything in terms of gold instead of dollars because I think that gives me a nicer, a more precise picture of everything else, because the relative value of things are changing at a speed that is hard to follow.
Yeah, the benchmarks, the measurement tools have changed. This is really a unique time.
On a technical level, if you looked at any charts, I know we're in uncharted territory above 3,000, but where do you see it going? Is 5,000 in the range, or just a round number?
Yeah, just a round number, maybe. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
But like I said, what I'm doing is I'm measuring everything else against gold because of the relative value problem. Like if I look at a stock index, it's up, and the S&P is up like I don't know 80% in the last 5 years. Is it? Measure it in gold. You'll see if it is. It's not. It's zero. It's flat. So yeah, I'm changing the way I'm measuring data basically because so far everybody measures everything in dollars and because of these relative value changes are so quick and so brutal, I think a different approach is needed.
Interesting. All right. Well, I think we'll leave it at that. Alex, thanks very much for coming on. Interesting topics from, Germany and the UK all the way down to Argentina and Brazil. It has been fascinating. For everyone that's still on, please subscribe. If you find our talks interesting, subscribe, ring the bell. Let us know what your thoughts are. If you'd like to get in touch with Alex at Catalyst Futures, drop a line down below and we'll put people in touch. Thanks, everyone.
Good to see you, Alex.
See
Fred,
you guys.
take care.
Listen.